and then get employed. Two other things that we always keep in mind, because we work with the poorest of segments, is that according to the World Disability Report, which is a very, very substantive report, there is a strong correlation between poverty and people with mental illness. And there is an effect both ways. Similarly, the poorest of people are also sadly the people whom we refer to as disabled. So if this is the case, next slide please, then the arguments that I would present is, if we're looking at tackling poverty, forget disability, forget mental health issues, but even if you're looking at tackling poverty, and if this is the segment that's at the bottom of the pyramid, then the one way out of this, out of poverty traps, is really economic upliftment and economic innovation. So obviously employment is a pathway. Again, if from a rights perspective, we're looking at being recovery focused, employment and social inputs are absolutely critical. The focus really has to be on well-being, and then of course the other UNCRPD and rights-friendly environment I've already spoken about. Now what is it that we do at the back end? First let me talk about what didn't work. In the beginning, when we started off, we stuck to what we had read in the textbooks and some of the work that we had absorbed, which is that you have vocational training centers, and then you have, like, you make either agarbattis, or you make soaps or candles or whatever else, and then you do it in a mass way. Of course, we didn't do soaps, candles, agarbattis, but whatever we did was like a group activity and do the mass thing. So also we were lowly resourced then, so it's easier then to engage in one activity. And we followed the traditional approach. That really didn't work very well. This whole very mundane thing, regardless of what your skills are and what the impact is, what your interest is and what the impact is, didn't work. So why didn't it work? Because there was a mismatch between the skills and the inputs that we were offering. So it was almost as if we were thrusting something down somebody's throat. And that happens in life to many of us as well. But here it didn't work. Also, another problem that we faced was that because we were lowly resourced and because we are an organization, we were bound by rigidity that sometimes is, inherent in any organizational sort of structure, because you cannot deviate too much from some of the norms that we laid out, some of the broad structures that you have in place. So that we found was a problem. Next slide. But what did work? So after a period of time, we realized, actually in the initial couple of months, the approach was a little individualized, but then it moved to conforming to what was the norm then and what we read in textbooks. And then when we saw that it didn't work, we again moved back, almost by accident and then as a strategy, to focus on individuals. So who are the kinds of people that we have? Now these are very small numbers, but I'm talking about them because our success stories are these, and our success stories are not the mass vocational training, pretty big, at least from a quality of life point of view. And there I talk from a joy, from a satisfaction point of view. The people who are actually happy working or who are sustaining employment are not those people who are engaged in mass activity, but those people where, so for example, a person has said, I love the process of caring over here, and this is something that Dr. Parshuraman was referring to, about the two verticals, caring for the elderly and child development. Some of the people over here who are from the rural areas and not educated, to the 5th, 6th, 7th class, said that, well, a lot of the healthcare workers here that you've drawn from panchayats are people like from my background, and I have sort of gone through a mental health issue, so I'm placed in a good position and I can actually care for others to provide me training, and I'll do that. So we have now 1 or 2 healthcare workers, primarily in Adekalam. We have a person who's a security guard in Kovalam. So you'll see that and her training has been on the job. So she handles the security, which works well for the rest of the people, gives her a sense of empowerment, it's not a job that requires too much, it's not time consuming, but at the same time, it's not like a mundane activity because the people coming in and out, so there is some activity, some social interaction. Again, things that work, a lot of people were interested in the beauty industry, because that's something that, we work primarily with women, at least in one of our projects, and beautician's job, whether it's a simple massage or whether it's a manicure, pet, whatever, but they were quite interested in that. This actually is, we have at least 10 people who were trained, of which there are now currently 4 people who are employed and earning. Bhagya has gone back and she said she's earning 8,000 rupees. So, and along with accommodation. Now this is a good salary, and there are a lot of beauty parlors now, because this industry is really growing. And there are a lot of beauty parlors, and this is also something that people, because grooming then helps you. Then there are other things as well which I have added actually there. Like there are several people with mental health issues that I've noticed who like animals, and they like caring for animals. So dog nannies, animals, there are so many people who now adopt pets, and they like having nannies for their pets. So work very well both in Adekkalam and in Kovalam, and we pay a small amount. We haven't started marketing it, but this is another area that we'd like to actually market, because I feel there'll be a lot of support here and a lot of strong market here. Of course, we have the regular tailoring, block printing, which we have Shashi here who heads it, and we have some of our products. We also have Ratna Boli's products. Her products are amazing, and she is going to present, I think, later in the afternoon. So those products are outside as well. The idea of what the person was engaged in prior to his or her illness was very critical. So if he or she was a nurse prior to that, or a librarian prior to that, to try and see if the person actually enjoyed that occupation, and if the person could be encouraged to move back to that, to develop that skill, re-engage with that skill, and then find an opportunity in that sector. I think that was important. So we had one person working in Adekkalam as a librarian, one person who worked in Kovalam as a nurse, who's gone back, who's setting up a center in Trichy, working with mental health, people with mental health issues. We were very clear then that one size doesn't fit all, and it's important, like in the case of anybody else, that there be a clear career path that leads to independent living. And that to facilitate in this, one of the important strategies besides individualized care and individualized inputs is to ensure that there are proactive working alliances, which means somebody from the Banyan, maybe a social worker, maybe a community worker, has to actively engage with the community and engage with the employer. And on a continuous basis, at least for the first couple of years. If that doesn't happen, sustaining a state of well-being, sustaining the employment sometimes becomes a problem. Last few slides. Now, what are the barriers that we faced? Most of the people in the informal sector, now this is not just the story of people with mental health issues, but that of India. So benefits and security, again, a lot of this is in Dr. Gayatri Balagopal's research study. Nature of illness itself and the complexities that go with that. So sometimes there could be inconsistency. Some of the tablets they take could make them drowsy. They may be sleepy. They may be sometimes poorly motivated. Akhileshwar will talk about this later in his session. Stress could trigger a relapse. It's a tough balance. So to balance that is difficult, which is why this whole issue, especially when you talk about people with mental health issues, becomes very, very difficult. Stigma, so even if a particular behavior is a natural behavior, and it could very well be that I behave in that particular way or you behave in that particular way. If it's a person with a mental health issue, and I've sadly done this myself when working with people within the Banyan, that you attribute that to the illness, and it happens sometimes. All of us are human, so that is a huge problem, and that then demotivates people in the workforce, and and that leads to a dropout. Families and caregivers, you refer to expressed emotions, but in layman's language, are sometimes overcautious, so they don't want to encourage people to work. They want to, sort of safeguard out of the best of intentions their clients, and that ends up being a huge problem. There is, of course, gender-based discrimination that we referred to. Work is very, very low on priority. This, right from Dr. Tirunavukar in the first presentation onwards, spoke about in the DMHP program. So, and finally, facilitators in terms of, because it is low on priority, the workforce that you have in terms of either social workers leading this or rehab workers leading this is very, very minimal, and there's a huge, huge gap and huge need for training towards this, where people are determined and motivated to place work high on the agenda, which should then facilitate the process of work, of employment. Okay, just some global trends. So statistics, it's not any different anywhere else in the globe. So let's not feel too sorry for ourselves. So people with severe mental illness globally also are in a similar situation. UK 9% in the workforce, US 22 to 40%. Next slide. Two approaches have worked well abroad. Something called supported employment and something called IPS, individual placement model. I think Soumitra is going to be talking about global trends later. I don't know if you cover these two trends. But essentially what supported employment means is what we have been doing, and it carries some of the key elements that we have already spoken about, like individual engagement, vocational profiling, job development, job analysis, making sure the environment is good, job support, so make sure that you sustain it, make sure there's a career progression support. Now this seemed to work for a long while and continues to work, but what seems to work better is that instead of going through a large period of providing vocational training, skills development, and then placing people, try and do it on the job. So instead of place and train, train and place. No, sorry, instead of train and place and train. So let them get into the job and provide some basic preparation, some basic training, but let them learn while on the job. It breaks monotony, encourages, there is an incentive immediately. And so in that sense, it seems beneficial in the shorter sort of period. And that is an encouraging sort of trend. Next slide. So coming to the last part, so what are the recommendations really? I think some of this has already carried the recommendations, which is that we need to focus on building human resources. Human resources need to focus on trying and incorporating. We're not a country where we can say everything has to be individualized. We've tried to incorporate this as a culture or a value, as a theme in many of our interventions, that try and see there's a strategy or a way in which it can be sort of individualized. Focus on aptitude, focus on continued training on the job. Make sure follow-up is a very, very important component. And then two aspects that I'd like to stress on, which I'm sure the Commissioner Rural Development is going to follow through on, some work that we're doing with him. He's been very, very magnanimous and kind, like Girija has in the past, very proactive, like Mr. Desiraju and Sujaya have, who actually, I think, taken mental health to a completely different level by being as proactive and supportive. But what we think will work well, especially in rural areas, is if schemes like the NREGA can be utilized a little better and with focus on people with mental health issues. And we have a few people who are accessing that scheme. Salik is one of them here with us? Or yeah, only you? They're there. Two of them are there. And we'll talk about that later. And focus on Panchayati Raj institutions in one way or the other, so they can then encourage people with disabilities to be part of several welfare schemes, be part of the workforce, so the environment is a lot more conducive to their overall well-being and living conditions. Last slide. Yeah, finally, there is a need for more community workers who would be oriented in this particular way, need for more peer counselors. I feel when you say IEC, merely saying job is a requirement is not sufficient. It has to be in the form of testimonials, where you showcase success stories and not just say it is a necessity and stop with that, because there's no motivation, there is no showcasing. But I think that showcasing needs to happen. There needs to be a multi-sectoral perspective, which everybody has spoken about. And the role of a social worker, since that was a part of the topic, and I'm a social worker myself, I think that is, Dr. Parshuram spoke a lot about it. Shukta later is going to reflect on this as well. But I think this is essential, because when you look at the role of the social worker in the DMHP, first of all, we don't have too many social workers across the country. In the places that we have, the role is very ambiguous. It's not clear. I think if we're looking at a recovery-based model, the role of the social worker, in addition to working on IEC, working with Panchayati Raj institutions, working on convergence, and working with ASHA workers and multipurpose workers, should focus on employment if we are talking about a recovery-based model. So with these few words, thank you very much. Yes.
In your first slide, you mentioned, you quoted that NSSO survey, that 12.6% of persons are in employment. Now in the UK it is 9%. And we work at a grassroots level, and whether it's really 12.6%. And then further this research says that before the advent of the illness, 55.6% men and 42.4% women were employed.
You're reading from Gayatri research?
Yes, and also what you have given in the first slide. Now, you see the general population average is 41.3%. Now, persons who later on got mental illness, whether they were more in percentage-wise in employment, whether it can really be so when the employment generally comes, this illness comes when they are in their teens, mostly. So at that time they are not employed, they are mostly studying. So whether this percentage of 55.6...
You want Gayatri to respond to your query?
Some clarification is good.
Survey data and even the census, both of which show that the general population work participation rate is around between 35 to 40%. And among those who had work, those with mental illness had work, around 3/4 had to leave their work because of the illness. And this is so among the different disabilities that were studied by the NSS. This is so particularly among mental illness and those with blindness.
Can I suggest something? We'll get back to this because in 2 days detailed discussion. Some of the speakers have to speak.
Thanks, Vandana. And before I ask the next speaker to come on, being with the Banyan for very long, some of you probably would be very happy to know, taking on from what she was saying, that Anu, who has been one of our longest residents and a very, very skilled worker, trained by us when she talked about first place and then train. I think that is what was done. And today we are very happy to announce that Anu, who sits outside and mans both the booths, is a part of the Banyan. We have employed her as a vocational training assistant. And I'd like to place on record that this recommendation actually really came from our healthcare workers and one of our residents. We have Gaja Kavita, who recommended her heavily to become a part of the workforce of the Banyan, and also Auntie, as we call her, Priyadarshini Auntie. So we're very happy to say that Anu, who's sitting there, is part of our first, one of our first, other than others, Banyan employees, who was actually placed first and then trained later. Now, I'd like to request Dr. Vijay Kumar, Commissioner of Rural Development and Panchayat Raj in the Government of Tamil Nadu. Primarily, he will speak on the role of Panchayat Raj institutions and the MNREGA scheme in facilitating employment. I would also like quickly to thank him for being so proactive when the group from Banyan and BLM went to meet you, and he'll talk more about it.